what truly inspired Simply Fed was first my own personal experience. When I had my first daughter, May, she was born early. She was born underweight. Your first task as a parent is feeding this kid and keeping it alive. And, I'm a pretty type A person. I'm married to a physician. And, I personally have never felt so broken than feeding a baby. And so I got inspired to really rethink what this paradigm could look like.
Today, I'm talking to Andrea Ippolito, who is the founder of Simply Fed, a nationwide telehealth platform that's democratizing access to baby feeding and breastfeeding services for free. Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Martina, and I'm on a mission to increase representation of early stage startup investors. This tweet is the reason that I met Andrea. That's right, I had 4 canceled flights trying to get to upstate New York, and sometimes really frustrating situations can lead to beautiful outcomes. I am so glad I met Andrea in the service line of my 4th flight that was canceled actually, and we struck up a conversation. I had such a hard time pulling a bio together for Andrea because she's just so accomplished. Her career seamlessly interweaves innovation and technology, and it's just really inspiring. So here are some highlights. She served as the director of the Department of Veteran Affairs Innovators Network and oversaw a $10.5 million budget. She was a Presidential Innovation Fellow based out of the White House. She co-founded a smart scheduling app that was acquired by Athena Health in 2016. Not only is she the founder of Simply Fed, but she's also a professor of entrepreneurship at Cornell University based out of Ithaca. Andrea, thank you so much for being on this show. I super appreciate you taking the time and would love to just have you tell us a bit about you.
Oh, well, thanks so much for the opportunity to be here. With all of the air travel has been recently, and as, painful as it was at the time, this was so wonderful getting to know you and so honored to be here. So my name is Andrea Ippolito, and I'm the CEO and founder of Simply Fed. I'm a biomedical engineer by background, worked in medical devices. And then in graduate school, my research was for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff on how to improve access to behavioral health care services for service members faced with post-traumatic stress. And the focus was on telehealth. And so I've been working in telehealth for over a decade. And then I co-founded my first company out of grad school called Smart Scheduling, and it was later acquired by Athena Health. And then I went to the federal government and I worked there for 3 years, first as an innovation fellow based out of the White House, Office of Science and Tech Policy. And then I stayed on to lead this initiative called Innovators Network. And fast forward at the end of that, I was pregnant with my first daughter and we moved to Ithaca, New York, where at the time I joined the faculty at Cornell in the College of Engineering. And that's when I had my first daughter and had that personal experience with feeding my baby. And that's what inspired me to found Simply Fed.
Amazing. And also shout out to Ithaca because that's where I went to high school. So how did you land on the name Simply Fed, and also kind of what inspired Simply Fed?
So, what truly inspired Simply Fed was first my own personal experience. When I had my first daughter, May, she was born early. She was born underweight. And I started off breastfeeding. I had no idea what to expect. I felt like no one told me during any of my, what felt like dozens of appointments during pregnancy. It actually wasn't, but it felt like it was a lot. No one really talked about baby feeding as much. And then all of a sudden you're so focused on the labor, and all of a sudden you have this baby, and then, your first task as a parent is feeding this kid and keeping it alive. And, I'm a pretty type A person. I'm married to a physician. And, I personally have never felt so broken than feeding a baby, even though I have this healthcare experience and, have a family member who's in healthcare. But I've never felt so broken. It was so tied. Baby feeding was so tied to my health. It was so tied to my baby's health. And my daughter kept dropping weight, and she was down to 4 pounds. And I felt like a colossal failure, with my first kid. And so I got inspired to really rethink what this paradigm could look like. And then as I dug underneath the surface, I learned that breastfeeding support is supposed to be fully covered by health plans under the Affordable Care Act. And, this policy is over a decade old. It's instituted via CMS, Center for Medicare and Medicaid Policy. And, when you're a healthcare entrepreneur, the question you always get is, who pays? And the fact that there is a payer out there, health plans with commercial and Medicaid, that are supposed to be covering baby feeding and breastfeeding support services fully at no cost to families starting during pregnancy, so you get that education for as long as you're breastfeeding in any capacity, whether that's small or large. The fact that this policy is there, that's one of the things you look for as an entrepreneur. Like, wow, there's just an untapped opportunity. And I also learned that, most people both breastfeed and use formula, and sometimes they, breastfeed more and formula feed less. And in my case with my first daughter, I was formula feeding a lot more than I was breastfeeding. And the reality is it's not this either or between breastfeeding and formula feeding. Most people do both, but either way, no matter how you feed your baby, we need inclusive baby feeding options that actually meet parents where they're at. And so those are my two main observations. That it was hard and there was someone supposed to be paying. And secondly, that we need more inclusive, non-judgmental feeding options. And so that's what really inspired me to found SimpliFed, and just saw this huge untapped opportunity.
Wow, that's incredible. And how did you end up on the name?
Oh yeah, so the name was that we wanted to, well, first off, the whole process of naming a company is just unnecessarily complicated. And I really shout out to all the people that just like randomly come up with a name and you feel good about it. But it took us a while to come up with a name that we felt good about. And so there's no perfect name. So my only thought there is, don't over-index on it. Do the best you can, and it'll be what it will be, right? Like IBM used to be International Business Machines, like terrible name, and here they are. So don't worry too much about it. And I'm an engineer, so branding folks would probably vehemently disagree with what I just said. So, but we wanted a name that was inclusive. So fed, right? If we don't allude to breasts, we don't allude to formula, we say fed, because that's the goal: feed your baby so they grow and be healthy. And so the Fed is Best initiative is very polarizing though, so we just wanted to keep fed in there somehow, but not allude to anything else. And then simply in it, we were trying to be punny, simplified. By the way, that was a poor decision, because now everything autocorrects to simplified, so don't do that. So we wanted to create this feeling of we make it simple and frictionless for you to help feed your baby. And so that's where the name came up with.
Thank you for elaborating on that. And great to know about the pun and the autocorrect. I feel like autocorrect still does things for me where I'm like, that's a real word, I swear. So how did you get started? When did this idea turn into action?
So the company officially got started in 2019, and when people are telling their founding stories, there's always a revisionist history associated with it. And for me, so my daughter was born in February 2018, and there was this pain point that I felt from that moment of like, wow, we need inclusive baby feeding systems, and holy moly, the formula industry is so messed up, and it's run by these three incumbents. And obviously during the last few months, we've seen that play out in spades, and just the whole baby feeding system needs to be like rethought to really meet parents where they're at. So, but I had a kid, I had a newborn, and I was, it was something that was keeping me up at night, and I would like be Googling. That's something I always think about, is like, what are you constantly Googling? And that's what it was for me. But at the same time, I had a newborn. And so I was navigating that and becoming a first-time parent. And I was still teaching full-time at Cornell. And so for me, it was a multi-month. And then I met some other great team members that were also very inspired by this mission. And we started working on it, and, nights and weekends type thing. But it wasn't like we were working on nights and weekends, and then the next month we went and raised money. It was arguably 1 to 2 years that we were getting off the ground. And that was the pace that worked for me while I still had another job. And so one of the things I like to share is that for a lot of people, you can't just like quit your job, right? I don't come from generational wealth where you can just quit your job and work on something full time. And there is a narrative out there, well, if you were that committed, you would do it. And it's like, well, that's not realistic for most folks. And that wasn't realistic for me. It wasn't realistic for me financially at the time. It wasn't realistic for me because I had a newborn kid. And it's not that you can't, because I had my second kid when I was fundraising. So, but just to say that, like, pick the pathway and rate that works for you. And it was something that I was working on for a while. And then really in May 2019, it became a little bit more real. And so that's when we incorporated But I would say we didn't hit our stride until 2020. And that's when, weirdly enough, because it was a fun year to have a kid and be working and also founding a company, but it validated our approach with really democratizing access to services via telehealth. And then we started to get some early traction, and that was then what we used to raise our pre-seed, and that's when it became even more real.
So what's it like being a founder?
Being a founder is, I think it maybe it doesn't appear, but I remember thinking, wow, that looks so fun and awesome, and it is. It's like, this is my dream, right? I get to tackle the problem that I feel so inspired about. It was keeping me up at night, and it's something that I'm just incredibly passionate, life's work. And it's hard. Like, it's super hard. It's super hard being a person while being a founder because you care so deeply about the mission, because you're so excited to make an impact with it, because you're excited to really bring this to the market to help support your customers, but also truly scale it. It is all encompassing, and it is hard to also be a person. And for me, I don't have all these like exciting, tremendous hobbies outside of being a founder. I have 2 little girls that are 4 and 1.5. And I have my friends and my family, and you're still a human being. And so sometimes it's hard to separate the two, but you have to remember that you are a human being outside of being a founder, and it's all encompassing. Like, literally whenever I'm awake, I'm really thinking about the company, and also I'm navigating being a parent too. And so I do try to step away as much as I can and be present. However, it is hard, and it's something that I'm constantly grappling with. People talk a lot about the work-life balance thing, and I don't think it really exists. You just have to make it really work for you. And I'm very lucky that I have a supportive partner. I'm very lucky that I have 2 sets of grandparents, and just acknowledging that privilege that comes with that. But it's awesome being a founder. I'm so lucky. I pinch myself every day, and I think about where we were last year at this time versus the impact we're making. And I also, it's hard. And that's when you're tackling hard, gnarly, complex problems, especially in healthcare, it's going to be difficult, and both on you personally. But I'm just so grateful to be able to execute this mission.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I remember when we met, you were coming from Colorado from like a business meeting, and then you were going straight into vacation up north in the Adirondacks. I was just like, wow, she's doing it all.
Yes. And, it's funny. It's hard to step away. And I think a lot of people have some strategies that they use to step away during vacation. I'm personally not good at this, and it's something I'm growing and working on. But yeah, it's you have to set that time apart to be with your family and friends.
Yeah. So you're also a second-time founder, because you founded also the smart scheduling app back in the early 2010s. So I'm curious, from your perspective, now that you're a second-time founder, what are some things that you've kind of learned the first time around that you're applying this time around?
Yeah, absolutely. So smart scheduling was founded when I was in grad school, and I tell my students, former and I still teach a little bit I guess I do have a hobby. I teach 4:30 on Tuesdays. And I tell my students, like, I personally think grad school is a great time to found a company. And maybe it's your first company, and it's a great time because you get that protected space. Also, everyone returns your emails when you're a student. So not everyone, but a lot of people, and because you're hungry to learn and thirsty to learn. And so it's a great time to do customer discovery on whatever thing you're working on. And so what I will say, though, is having that experience from co-founding that company the first time, you take those learnings to your next company. And I get why investors like investing and supporting second, third serial entrepreneurs, because you're always learning and always you're hungry for that learning, but you can take those learnings and apply it to your second company. And by the way, that company, I was a lot younger, and I didn't have as much experience. So there's just a ton. I'm always still very much learning with the second company, and that never, ever, ever, ever stopped. So, but I mean, I would say the big things I learned are things surrounding, getting a company off the ground, doing customer discovery, really listening to your customers, de-risking the hypothesis that are most risky to your having a sustainable and scalable business model early and often, and having that experimental mindset. But also just frankly, that mindset of being able to be told no all the time and just letting it roll off your back. And then there's just some general technical quote unquote things about founders agreements and incorporating and just trademarks. There's just, when you're a founder, you're doing a lot of that stuff and you become you have this superficial knowledge and a lot, and it's all complicated, of course, and trying to make those trade-offs of what you do versus what you find someone else to help support you with, but how do you pay them? And so you're always navigating those challenges, but when you have that at least baseline knowledge, it's just a lot easier to spin up with your second company, and what to, a little bit more what to focus on and how you can get that early traction to show as evidence. That's so critical. And I think a lot of people, I was just talking to a former student this morning, and she's in the medical device industry, and she is overly focused on the technical side of things. When I was saying no, focus on alongside that, the technical stuff matters, but you got to focus on the economic buyer. What do they care about alongside your technical offering? And those types of things, it's, especially as engineers, if you're an engineering founder, it's hard to separate, but you have to switch your mind shift on what you need to de-risk early.
I think that's so smart. Such a great takeaway. What can you de-risk early? Now that you've co-founded SimpliFed for a while, I'm curious, what's been your first hire? When did you know it was time to kind of get someone else on board?
Yeah, so in November of 2020 is when I was able to bring on the first angel / pre-seed funding, and I got to tell you, and shout out to my first person that said they would invest in me. His name was Eric Young. He actually passed away recently. And, that first person that invests in you, oh my gosh, it is just an overwhelming sense of joy. And so being able to bring in some money to help bring on some capacity is so important. So brought on a team member. She's amazing. Her name is Erin, to help really think through our operations, because we're in healthcare. And so it's very clinical ops focused, and how do we get stuff done, and how do we really set up our provider team, and how do we make sure we're doing everything right. And as an early team, you're just all about execution tied to de-risking these hypotheses. So just bringing on that capacity, and then you make a little bit more traction, and you raise a little bit more angel money, and so it just all feeds off each other. But it sounds so obvious when you say it, but for me, even as a second-time founder, you just have to be overly focused on what milestones do I need to hit that are tied to my riskiest hypotheses, and then how much money do I need to accomplish those milestones. It sounds so obvious, but that's it. And that's when if you need to raise money, by the way, not all companies need to raise money, and you don't need, the vast majority of companies don't need venture capital. But if you do want to go the venture route, it's really important to be able to communicate what you hope to accomplish milestone-wise and what money you need, but then also knowing the incentives from the venture side and of what they're looking to see. And then hopefully you're finding alignment across both of those. And so what milestones you need to hit, and then what amount of funding you need to hit that, and what are the uses of those funds. And so that's what, for me, the third person we need to bring on is for our model to be successful, we need health plan contracts. So, and we're focused on Medicaid health plan contracts. So bring on our third team member, Jen, along with our provider network we were building alongside of that. Jen has tremendous Medicaid experience. So you're just trying to figure out what milestones you need to hit, and then how much of that's going to take based on the resources you need to accomplish that goal.
I would love to talk about fundraising then. So at what point did you realize that you needed to fundraise and essentially hire that first operations person?
When you just get so overwhelmed, and there you learn that you're not going to be able to accomplish your mission unless you grow your team. And so that's what was really important. And just in seeing that, I needed capacity, and we needed to build a team to really accomplish this mission. And if we were going to have the impact that we have this vision of accomplishing, we need to do so. And so went after some angels / pre-seed funding, and in kind of parallel to Eric wanting to invest. We had another angel investor. His name was Steve Gall, and his check was technically the first one to come in. And so, and then you have this like core set of angels, and then you work with them, and hopefully find a lead that can help set some terms. But as a pre-seed angel investor, that it's not as important until you get later. But for me, it was all about learning the fundraising process, and honestly, you're just talking with a lot of people on what that looks like, and then hopefully getting some terms from a lead investor or from a group of angels or pre-seed. And at that stage, we were raising via convertible note, which is, kicking that can down the road on your valuation. So bringing that convertible debt or note in, which then would convert to equity on a priced round, or you could do a safe, pick your poison. We did it via note. And so usually with that angel pre-seed round, you can choose. And a lot of people know that, but I like to share that just in case you don't. And then from there, we tried to close around, but then we brought on a little bit more funding via that note and those terms later. And then eventually we hit enough milestones where it felt good about going after raising our seed round. And we closed our $6 million seed round in May of this year.
Wow. Congratulations. So what did it feel like to fundraise? What was that like?
At first, it was because I with my first company. So even though the second company co-founded, I wasn't involved with fundraising as much. And so this one was really me leading the charge and doing the fundraising. And first, I got to be honest, it's a little unnatural, and for some people, it comes very naturally. For me, it took a little bit, and it takes a lot of practice. So I would say for anyone that's concerned about fundraising, the best advice I have for you is put together your pitch deck and then run it by a lot of people, and then get out there and have a really tight, organized fundraising process. So do your research on the investors that you want to reach out to, and make sure you're approaching them at the right stage. Like, don't approach a Series B investor when you're a pre-seed. That being said, you always are fundraising and always trying to build that relationship no matter what. That being said, have a very tight process. Do your research on the folks that you think would have invested in similar sectors or similar theses as your company, and then work to build a relationship with them, network to get those connections. But don't hesitate too long to get out there and get out there, get feedback, and then have a timeline, and then try to stick to that timeline. That being said, for me, it took a little bit longer than others, and that's okay. And then with my seed round, I just had a much tighter, much more organized process. Still took a while, but it's all about, for me, at least with the seed round, getting that lead investor. And then once you get that lead investor, then the process becomes a little bit relieving, I would say, but there's still a long process after you get that first term sheet from your lead investor. So I think sometimes people think, oh, you get the term sheet, bing, bing, boom, you're done. No, there's still a lot of stuff that happens after that with due diligence, et cetera, and having others join the syndicate or group of investors for that round.
So what do you wish you had known going into fundraising?
Great question. I would say that I wish I had, for the pre-seed round, I always recommend folks read Secrets of Sand Hill Road and, Venture Deals. I read those two books so you understand how venture capital works and how venture capitalists are incentivized. And once you learn that, it's great because you know where everyone's coming from. So that's one thing I say to first-time founders in particular. Take the time to understand, if you are going the VC route, take the time to understand, how venture capital works. And secondly, I wish I had thought, especially for my pre-seed round, more deeply about what I shared earlier. What are the milestones that you need to hit? What are the resources you need to hit that? And how much is that going to cost? And start there, and that's what you'll spend the bulk of your time. And then, in related to that, then you're going to talk a lot about the hypotheses that you need to test or what you have risked or de-risk along the process. And then the last thing I'll say is really understanding the process. So what fundraising looks like, and what happens, what's on a term sheet, what happens after a term sheet, what happens in between term sheet and closing. I wish I should have taken a little bit more time to know that. And then the last thing, actually, I think I said that before, but this is truly the last thing, is really talk to people that have run a very tight fundraising process. Have your hit list of investors and work to build relationships with them. And it goes so much better if you already have somewhat of a relationship. So the first time you hit them up for a pitch shouldn't be the first time you've met them. And so just remember that it's all about building relationships, building that trust, keeping folks updated. And I was talking with a near peer who was one step ahead of me, and he said that it took him, months to do his pre-seed, 5 or 6 months to do their seed, and then 2 months to do their Series A, and then the Series B was in like 30 days. And I know that's not representative for everyone, but if you do this right and you're building relationships with folks along the way, then hopefully it gets shorter and shorter and shorter. But there's no one right way, and so don't compare yourself to others too much. Do it the way that you need to do it, but it's good to be aware of those general timelines.
This is so helpful. So if the first time you talk to an investor shouldn't be the first time that you pitch to them, what should, for instance, be the first time that you go talk to an investor? Like, how do you start building that relationship?
Yeah, so there's two approaches here, and there's no one right answer. So I am very much of the approach that I mentioned of that you have to build relationships with folks over time. And one of the investors in my syndicate shared earlier with me this week is that some founders spend 90% of their time fundraising, and obviously we're saying generalizations here. Some founders spend 90% of their time fundraising and 10% of their time running the business. And then other founders, it's the exact opposite. And so for me, it's all about building relationships and keeping those contacts updated over time. And I'm still learning, by the way, not perfect there. But then the other way to that investor's point is that you're either fundraising or you're not fundraising. And actually, my Eric Young that I mentioned, that was our first investor, that's what he taught. He said, you're either fundraising or you're not. But then he would also say, but you're always kind of keeping in touch with people. And so it's not sometimes it's like 1 or 0, but just be aware that they shouldn't come, it shouldn't be cold as much as possible. You want to build that relationship with them. So some things that you can do, some tactics, are maybe you've talked with folks during your pre-seed that are actually more seed or Series A investors. And so what you can do is start building that relationship with them. And then if they're open to it, and if you're open to it, include them on your quarterly and monthly investor updates. And then touch base with them every 6 months. See, maybe it's just over email, maybe it's sharing a fun new milestone that you've hit, but just start seeding and building that relationship over time, and keeping them updated no matter what. And also that takes away the heat a little bit too when you're, say, raising your seed round and someone's like, I'm actually a Series A investor. Well, I'd really like the opportunity to still communicate and share what we're doing. So that way, once we hit the milestones from our seed, we can come after for our Series A. And so I would just say, don't err on the side of keeping people updated. And that's just the general approach that I got. That's the general advice I got from folks and followed.
Going back to a little bit more to like you as a founder, as like a product executive, for instance, I know it gets lonely at the top, and that is like a very common like thing that people talk about. So I'm curious from your perspective, like as a founder, does it get lonelier? And what does your support network look like? Who do you go to as a thought partner?
First off, it's just an incredible privilege to get to be a founder and have a team and accomplish our mission. And I feel so lucky to be able to do this work to increase impact. And so let me start that. And secondly, the good news is about being a parent is that you can have just an incredibly stressful day with what you're trying to accomplish. And I'm not saying this is, if you're not a parent, I'm not saying this is, but there is when a 4-year-old or 1.5-year-old comes in your room or is screaming, it weirdly grounds you. And maybe it's also a new type of stress. And there's so much more that we need to do to support parents that are founders, just to say that. And because you're on the clock once you have invested all, there's milestones you need to hit. But that being said, what's nice is that the kids, albeit it definitely creates stress and adds complexity, does ground me. And I am able to step away because of that. And my 4-year-old daughter really wants to go get her Halloween costume this weekend, and weirdly early, but good on her for planning. And that's great, right? That is great. That's time away that I'm stepping away, and I won't be thinking about SimpliFed. And so there's all these things that happen. Of course, I'm not saying that's the one time I'm stepping away this weekend, no doubt more. But having kids really does create that time. But yeah, it is hard. And when you're a founder, someone else told me, like, by the time it gets to you, it means that it's either no one else has been able to solve it, or it's a decision you need to make. And we're still pretty small. We're not that large. And again, there's an amazing privilege that comes along with making those decisions, but it's tough. You're grappling with pros and cons, and you just got to own the decisions you make and move forward.
What does your daughter want to be for Halloween?
This is well, the backstory there is I always wanted to be an astronaut growing up, and my mom was the first, and I had a great role model, my mom, who's an electrical engineer, and she also helped design the first space suits for women, and how women astronauts go to the bathroom in space. It was called the FUCT, the Female Urinary Continence Device, and so wasn't swearing there. That was literally the name of the device. So I always want my daughters to be astronauts, and essentially last year was the first year where she started like saying, yeah, I kind of want to be like Anna from Frozen, and started, having her own ability to make decisions. So, I think she was saying one of her friends wants to be Wonder Woman. So she's leaving her options open this year, but I'm not sure she's going to be the astronaut that I'm going to force my 1.5-year-old to be again.
Well, they can only be one, right? There can only be one. So you already got one in, and I'm sure your 4-year-old was an astronaut at a different point in time.
Oh yeah, when she was 1, 2, and for part of when she turned 3 as well. So it's time that she transitions.
Oh, that's hilarious. I love it. Moving back to like fundraising and starting a board, I'm curious, how do you choose who's on your board?
Well, for me, it was pretty simple. I had 2 co-lead investors who are fantastic. They're so aligned with our mission. I'm just so grateful to have such amazing investor partners, not just lead investors, but in our entire syndicate. I'm just truly so honored to find them. And so for me, it was actually pretty easy creating our board, because it's me and our 2 co-lead investors, and there's all sorts of fun you have to negotiate as part of that. So anyone listening, let me know, and I'm happy to chat through what that looks like. But it's our investors, and then you can have an independent board member, and you can also have a second. For us, we also have that independent board member, and also that second common stockholder as well. And so for us, we have a 5-person board, and but it's such a great process. And working with your board is if you've never worked with a board before, can be overwhelming, but if you gotta lean in and use it as a resource, and be communicating with them often, and to have them be a part of your team, because they have invested in you and they want you to succeed. And so one of the things we're still early in the board process. We've only been up for 5 months, but one of the things I was sharing with another founder was, really lean into having a board and communicating with them and keeping them updated, but also seeking their advice. And sometimes you won't always agree. And what my board has taught me, actually, and they've given me feedback, is that it's okay to disagree. And we want you to disagree sometimes. And that's great. And so don't feel like you need to agree on everything. That's actually where you get further faster, is when you can have really healthy discussions to ensure your business is successful.
That is amazing advice, because I definitely agree with that. I think it's important to have dissenting opinions to foster that proper discussion. And in the end, you can agree to disagree, but at least you kind of saw all the different perspectives and were able to really dive deep into that.
Yeah, exactly.
So we're going to move on to a little segment called Never Again. This is something I used to do with my product team back in the day, where we kind of talked about the things that we failed at, and just to try to really normalize failure. What's something that you failed at, just like really messed up?
Oh, goodness. There's so many things. That's
how I'm like every day. Every day.
And so never again, and it actually goes back to what we were just talking about, right? Never again feel like you need to make everything sound rosy and like rainbows and sunshine all the time. It's okay to be extremely honest about where you're at with things, and alongside that, have a plan for moving forward, and then get feedback on that plan. Is that don't feel like everything needs to be perfect. And that, by the way, that's in general life advice, not just with being a founder, but really see your investors as your board, as part of your team, and really make sure that they're they have the full picture. And actually, what I'm referring to is actually not related to board stuff as well. But you've seen this with companies. You've seen this with companies where they're not totally transparent with their board or totally transparent with their investors, and then you end up in this hole, and then it's even worse. So I think it's better to tackle things early and be open and upfront, but then create a clear pathway and plan for going forward.
That's great advice. So seeking more advice from Andrea, for founders that are starting out, what's like one tip you would give them?
I would say you're gonna make mistakes, and don't dwell on them, but treat it as learning. I saw this great conversation, and I can't cite who did it, so I do apologize for that. But one of the common traits they say about founders is that we're willing to put, shots on goal, and we're willing to take risks and fail, and or it may not even be failure, but we're willing to put ourselves out there. And so I would say, don't be too hard on yourself. Like, good on you for going out there and shots on goal. And there's a lot of sports analogies. I played ice hockey, and so I tend to talk about that. I was a terrible ice hockey player, by the way, but nonetheless, it's about putting yourself out there, but I love that never again philosophy that you just said, but take that as a learning. And that's why founders are able to get further faster, because they're willing to learn quickly. And wow, that's super great learning, and take that and then go farther faster. But the key is to apply that. And where people go wrong is they don't take that mistake or failure or learning and apply it to where they're going next. But if you think about the cycles, if you can do that and then iterate constantly, then you can just make such tremendous impact to accomplish what you hope to as part of your vision for your organization.
Never again was such a perfect tie-in then.
Yeah, it
was. What about for people that are starting to fundraise? What's like one piece of advice you would give them?
Really tight process, really organized process. Come up with your hit list of investors, and then figure out who that's connected to them. And then, have your start date, but like be building the relationship ahead of that. And then, some people like to do it in like a sprint, and have a month-long fundraising sprint. That's one way to do it. I like to share these numbers, and I'm not saying that this is typical. But I like to be transparent with my numbers. So I talked to, as part of my seed round, 140 unique venture capital firms, institutional of some type. 40, I shared a data room or deal room with, which is where all my due diligence materials, and some of those were more serious than others. And then 6 joined our syndicate. And so, like, think about that, like 140 unique venture, so that's at least one conversation. To get to the sharing the data room or deal room, sometimes that was one conversation, sometimes that was 5. And then to get from 40 to 6, there was, at least a couple conversations, if not more. And so I would say that, for some people it goes a lot faster than that, obviously. And so, but I do like to share that was what it took for me, and that's okay. And just being very transparent, because when I was starting off, like, you would hear like, oh, I closed my pre-seed or my seed round, and our seed round was priced. I closed my price round in like a month, and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm a giant failure. And it's like, no, it just, sometimes it is what it is. And I, by the way, I have lots of learnings now from that process that I'm applying as we gear up to raise our Series A next. So it don't be super hard on yourself. Everyone has their own process, but run a tight process and be organized ahead of time is the best thing you can do.
Something else that you do, which you are a professor at Cornell. So I'm curious, speaking of learnings, what's something that you've learned from your students?
Yeah, so I'm, I only teach one class on Tuesday evenings now, but I used to be full-time faculty member in the College of Engineering. And, first off, like, students keep me young and humble, and I'm in my late 30s. So, I recognize I'm still young, but at the same time, like, whoa, it is so great being able to be on a college campus and getting to see how they work and operate and learn from them. And one thing I've been very impressed by my students is that they're always willing to advocate for themselves. And even though I'm, very headstrong, very confident, it's refreshing to see how sometimes confident they are. And it reminds me, like, if I'm ever down, like, remember that 20-year-old student that is confident, but no, it's a little bit of a joke. But what I've learned from my students is that, it's so refreshing to see them work on teams collaboratively. And I learned, like, how you can create these really fun teams where people are excited about the work that you're doing. And I see how they do it in their, Gen Z way. And I take that to myself. And the other thing I'll say is, and this is a lesson of learning from students, but being able to teach still, when you can teach something, it is honestly, I think, the best way to learn. And I know that sounds counterintuitive, but when I'm lecturing and teaching, it reminds me of things I need to do, or I need to do research on something that I can then apply to SimpliFed. And so teaching is one of the best ways to learn. So even if it's a topic you're not an expert in, I always encourage folks to teach someone something and do your own research and then share back.
We're going to do a rapid round, which I did not share these with you. First one is Ithaca or Boston?
Well, Ithaca for right now, maybe Boston when I retire.
Okay, that's fair. I did see that you were in the Kappa Alpha Theta sorority. So this one is about sorority life. Kappa Kappa Gamma or Kappa Delta sorority?
Oh, Kappa Delta, because I was co-president of the Society of Women Engineers. I was a huge nerd, still am. And a lot of the SWE girls were, and Katie. So, like, they would disown me if I said that.
Okay, great. Pre or post money valuation?
Oh, post. Yeah.
Okay, amazing. So, Andrea, thank you so much for joining. I am so curious. What do you have going on? Where can people find you? Tell us how they can get in touch.
So feel free to, DM me on Twitter at Andrea K. Ippolito. You can email me at Andrea@SimplyFed, not simplified, at simplyfed.us. And don't hesitate to reach out, because I've been in the shoes and I have a lot to learn. I lean on near peer founders, so those that are a step ahead of me, a lot. And so I'm more than happy to chat with anyone, and near peer founders, those that are a step ahead of me, I'll be coming at you for advice as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Andrea, for sharing your wisdom with us. This was really great. I can't stop smiling. I feel like my cheeks hurt because I just had such a great time with you. So thank you so much.
The feeling is extremely mutual. So truly appreciate you, Martina.
Thank you.
I'm so blown away by this interview with Andrea. She's equal parts vulnerable, honest, and so inspiring. I'm so grateful that she was able to join us and share her journey. Next week, I'll be talking about what an accredited versus a non-accredited investor is, and how you can get started as either. Make sure you like, subscribe, share with a friend. Can't wait to see you next week.